is that people are walking away from the book, and this just makes me so happy, um, is that the book just makes everyone feel there's a feeling of contentment that comes over them for reading it. It's they say I walk away from this feeling hopeful and happy, and I feel as though it takes away some of the troubles that we're seeing in the world right now, whatever it is in the news, whether it's with COVID or, quarantines or who's doing what. And it's hard, I mean, this 2020 has been a tough year. We try to look for little bits of light. Um, Somebody said, well, has this been the worst year ever? And I can't say it has. For me, it's been actually, my daughter had her second baby. So I became a grandma for the second time. So my little James is my little bright light. He's my bright light in 2020. I had this book come out and I'm very proud of it. So that's been another bright light. Being able to go back to school. Thank you. Being able to go back to school. Because I'm a school librarian, and having been out from March until the end of the year and being able to go back and see some of my students and my colleagues in person and get out of the house, that's been a bright light. So I've been trying to find those bright lights, and I know it's hard. It's been a tough go, and that's what I want to talk about with romance. And romance is called the literature of hope. And I take that very seriously, because I think that we forget how much we need hope in our lives so that we don't kind of go into that pit. Unfortunately, because of that, romance is considered lowbrow. It is considered it lacks depth, that it doesn't have any meat on its bones. And I think that's a very unfair assessment. Just because something ends happily doesn't necessarily mean that it lacks depth or lacks power. So let me just talk about the definition of romance as it's given by Romance Writers of America, which is one of the largest writing organizations in the world. And it's that romance is a story that focuses on a central relationship between a couple that has an emotionally uplifting ending. So that could be the happily ever after or the happily for now. And what I mean by happily for now is that you don't have, oh, we're going to get married and walk right down the aisle. It means that the couple is happily together at the end and they're going to see what happens moving forward. So the happily ever after, the happily for now. And just because somebody knows how this book is going to end, people say romance is predictable, romance is formulaic, romance is, it's not a challenge for me to read. And I say to them, all genre fiction has expectations. If you read mystery, you want to know. If you read a cozy mystery, you want to know who done it at the end of the book. If you don't get that answer, you're going to be pretty angry as a mystery reader. All right. Thrillers. There are certain expectations with thrillers. There's certain expectations with crime fiction. Women's fiction, which is a genre that's different than romance, but they kind of cross over sometimes, has an expectation of the fact that it's about the woman's journey. So what we have is a genre, and any genre has certain expectations, and romance readers expect the happily ever after. So let me ask all of you, first of all, are you romance readers? Regular romance readers. And second, do you have a favorite genre or subgenre of romance? So are you a historical reader, a Regency, contemporary, paranormal, sci-fi romance? There's sci-fi romance, fantasy, urban fantasy, which crosses into romance. Do you like romantic women's fiction, which tends to have both? But, just let me know where you are on the spectrum. And if you're not a romance reader, let me get you over to our side. That would be my plan. So, how did I get into this? I've been a romance reader probably since my teens. I'm sure since my teens. My aunt who lived up on 17th Street in Huntington. I used to go to her house. My father would drop me off for an afternoon to visit my Aunt Sophie. And she had bags full of Harlequin romances and the old Harlequins and the old bodice rippers, like from Avon and things like that, from like Bertrice Small and Rosemary Rogers and Kathleen Woody Wiss. And I'll talk about those in a minute. And she would give them to me. And if my mother knew what she was giving me, not good. But my Aunt Sophie's like, you should be able to read whatever you want. So I had Mary Stewart. I had tons of different kinds of books, the Gothics. And I started reading those. I did write. I wrote some great angsty teen fiction when I was in high school, and I had a notebook, and I used to share these stories with my friends at lunch. And just to show you how deep the librarian gene goes in me, I had a circulation system so that when I loaned out a story, I knew who had it and when they were supposed to bring it back. So I was a librarian way back then too. I just didn't realize that that's where I was going to end up. And then I was a journalist. I went to school for broadcast journalism. I worked in public relations for a little while, but I always wanted to be a teacher. So I went back to school after working in PR for a couple of years, and I got my teaching degree, and I was an English teacher. And now I'm a school librarian, and I've been a school librarian for 25 years. So I have 35 years in education. I've been writing for 20 years. It took me 12 years to get my first contract. My first book that I wrote took me about 9 months, and it was awful. It was 120,000 words, and it was 120,000 words of awful. But it was a great learning experience. And I was very fortunate to have a couple of very kind people who read it, editors and agents, when I started to send it out, who read it and didn't just reject me outright. What they did was they gave me some good advice. And they said, you've got some promise here. There are all these things wrong, but what you need to do is find a writer's group and learn the craft. So that's what I did. And I joined my local chapter of Romance Writers of America, which is on Long Island, the Long Island Romance Writers. I bet you didn't know there was a little pod of us. About 1/3 of the group is published. Several are bestsellers. They publish in all genres, and it's quite an active group. It's been tougher with having to meet virtually, but it's a very active group, and it's one of the reasons that I was able to get published. It did take me a while, but I took a break from the time I started to about, like, I worked at it for 5 years. I took a break, and then I went back to it in 2010 and then went full tilt. So Cheryl says that she likes when romance is mixed with mysteries. And I'm going to talk about that and about genre crossovers in a little while, because I think that's when you get your best stuff, because people are really pushing the envelope with that. But what attracted me to romance was the fact that it made people happy. It made me happy. I was a young mom. I worked full time. I was going to library school, and my escape was to read. And I picked up Nora Roberts, and I read a lot of Danielle Steele, which isn't really romance, but it is. But I read a lot of Nora Roberts, and I went back and I read those books by Bertrice Small, who, did anybody ever read Bertrice Small? Skye O'Malley?
No.
Oh my gosh. I'm telling you, E.L. James and 50 Shades of Grey had nothing on Bertrice Small. Bertrice, Rosemary Rogers, Joanna Lindsay, who just passed away, Kathleen Woody Wiss, these were the women who in the late 70s, 75, 76, 77, they became what were called the Avon ladies. And they made the huge switch in romance from the 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 very somewhat chaste, more less racy Harlequins. It's when the switch came to putting the first time sex on the page. So it went from Georgette Heyer, who wrote those more the more proper Regency, to Bertrice and Joanna, and they wrote medieval, they wrote Georgian, they wrote all different time periods. One of Bertrice's first books was called The Cadine. She set it in the Middle East. She looked at exotic locales. One of her most famous series was the Skye O'Malley series, which was about this woman who was basically a pirate and a warrior. And she was out on the high seas, but if you want a bodice ripper, that's the one. The Flame and the Flower is considered the breakthrough book. And these are called the Avon ladies, and Avon Romance published them. There were 6 of them. And this changed the way romance grew. And it was the birth of the contemporary Harlequin line, like the Presents and the medical romance and things like that, because people couldn't get enough. The subscription packages that Harlequin sends out, I don't know if you knew this, but you can subscribe to your favorite line, super romance or medical or suspense or the Presents, and you get 4 books a month religiously. You know, every month you get 4 books in your mailbox. And the Harlequin Presents are those little red and white, the white books with the red trim on them. And they have titles like the Tycoon's Secret Bride. And my favorite one of that is the Playboy Chic's Virgin Stable Girl. And that's a real title. I'm not kidding. Not as good as Pregnesia, which was a Harlequin intrigue, and that was actually a title. And even the author of the book says, yes, the book was as ridiculous as the title. So yeah, do we jump the shark every once in a while? Sure. But I don't know, I could sit down and read a Harlequin Presents, the Secret Princess's Playboy fiance or something in an afternoon and take a little vacation. And that's really what it is. So romance provides escape for people, and it doesn't provide unrealistic expectations. What it does is provide escape. And there's nothing wrong with escape. When my dad died in 2012, I was caretaker. He was in a nursing home, but I was the one making all the decisions. And one of the things that was so hard was all of a sudden my role changed. You know, he'd been ill for a while, so we knew he was going to pass. He went very peacefully, but it was still tough because all of a sudden it was like everything was different. And I was close to my dad, so it was hard. I read a Harlequin Presents 3 days a week. One afternoon, I would sit in the chair in my office and I would sit down with one of those books on my Kindle. And that's how I got through that summer. When I was sitting next to his bed in a hospital, or when he ended up in an emergency room and he would sleep, I would take a book out and I would read. And it provided me with a break. And Kristen Higgins and Robin Carr and Susan Elizabeth Phillips and Jennifer Cruzy, they gave me some escape time when I needed it most. So I think that's what romance authors aim to do. Now, with my book, Christmas in Angel Harbor, which just came out, it released on October 29th. It is my 18th book. I've published 18 books since 2013. So I've been busy, maybe a little too busy, especially since I'm working. But this was actually probably one of my favorite books to write. I think it came one of the easiest books to write. It was a hard edit because my editor really put me through my paces with it. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. But what I loved about this book so much is it's what's called a seasoned romance, which is a new category in romance. It's not a genre so much because it's about age, and it's primarily focused on heroes and heroines who are 40 and up. And you might think that that's not so unusual, but in the romance genre, it is. The majority of heroes and heroines are between 25 and 35. And the men tend to be on the older side and the women tend to skew younger. It is an old model. It's not necessarily progressive. And what I wanted to do, and there's a group of us who are trying to push the envelope a little bit, because most of our readers are between 40 and 65. And they don't experience things the same way as a 25-year-old does. And they don't necessarily want to read what a 25-year-old does. But most 25-year-olds, you know where they're reading? They're reading on their phone. They're reading snippets from like Radish. They're sitting in a train. This is what my daughter does. She's like, oh yeah, I have this app. There's an app called Radish. And people put books up in 1,500 word installments. And they'll be like, oh, I like this. So I'll buy some credits and I'll read the next installment, or I'll be able to do that. And while they're on their commute, or while they're, sitting at, on a lunch break or whatever they're doing, they open up their phone and they read for 15 minutes. And that's how they do it. Older readers don't read the same way, because we aren't as tied. I won't say aren't as tied to our devices, but we don't use them in the same way. And so we figured it was time to actually recognize that people over 40 do fall in love. They do have intimate relationships. They have second chances, but the way their relationships develop is different than the way a 25-year-old's relationship develops. There's not going to be that same rush that you're going to find. So what I did with Angel Harbor is it's a reunion story. My characters are both 50. They haven't seen each other in more than 25 years. They had a very close friendship that was starting to move into a romantic relationship, and then it fell apart. And it just didn't happen. And so they come back together. This was necessary, I think, partially. When you write a Christmas romance, you're dealing with a compressed timeline. You tend to start, say, in November, and you go to just around Christmas, maybe you go to New Year's. So you don't want to deal with insta love, oh, we just met for the first time and boom. It can be done. Sarah Morgan does it like nobody else. She'll get somebody madly in love in, 6 days. And she does it brilliantly. But I don't do it well. So I don't do insta love. So Christmas in Angel Harbor is a reunion story. And my heroine, Jane, is a bookstore owner. And for those of you that know the area, I base this town on Northport. I live in Huntington. I've been in Huntington my whole life. My father has been here. My father's family's been in town since 1929. So I have very deep roots in the area. Northport is wonderful. I mean, you can go into town, you still see the trolley tracks, and there is wonderful shops, and people are just so nice. And the shop owners all have great relationships. They work together to kind of build up the town's profile. So I wanted to do that. And there's no bookstore in Northport. So I said, well, I could put one here. But the impetus to my story was actually It's a Wonderful Life. I love that story. I love the movie. I love the themes. I love the moral of the story, that everybody matters. Everybody makes a difference. That idea that no man is a failure who has friends. Clarence's last message to George at the end of the movie. And I wanted that to be Jane's experience, that she feels as though she's let people down or things aren't going the way she planned. And is she a failure? Is her life what she thought it was going to be? And not to the point that she's going to throw herself off a bridge into a river, but certainly that she has to do some evaluation. And what I wanted to do was throughout the stories to show that everybody has a way of making an impact, even in the smallest ways. So what I'm going to do is I can read a piece of this. This is from an early chapter. This is, she's seen Danny now for the first time. He came in and he's decided that he's having trouble. He's a writer. He's trying to redirect his career and make a pivot. And when he was starting to write, when he was a teenager, he would spend time in the bookstore and her dad was there. And that's, Jane used to see him all the time when they were teenagers. And he thought, well, maybe if I go back to the bookstore, maybe if I come home and go back, maybe I'll have a chance to kind of find my roots again with my writing. So he has done that. And he came in while she was in a book club meeting and he met her 17-year-old daughter. And I happen to love this scene, but this is after Danny has met Tara and Jane comes out and has a conversation with her daughter and then with Danny. Jane came out of the book club meeting with a headache for the ages. The new historical fiction the members had chosen to discuss had spawned more arguments than conversation over the past hour. Between the liberties taken with the timeline in Georgian England and an intense dislike for some of the ladies in the group harbored for one of the protagonists, there was little agreement on the merit of the work. For Jane, any book that elicited strong emotions was a winner, unless they were hostile emotions. Still, the ladies chose another book for next month and left chattering about what a nice time they'd had. Jane had to wonder what the woman considered a good time. Go figure. When she got home, she might have to break out a bottle of wine or chocolate or both. The lights in the children's room were low. As she walked through, she straightened up the area. She shelved the book, put a stuffed animal back on the rack, and pushed in the chairs at the small tables. Her mom had really done an amazing job with the decorations. Pine garlands adorned the tops of bookshelves and hung artfully over the floor-to-ceiling windows that faced Main Street. Glittering Christmas decorations of varying styles and sizes sat on the round table by one of the front windows. They would be moved later in the month, and a large Christmas tree would be there instead. In front of the other window, a lovely silver menorah surrounded by sparkling gelt and a few dreidels was waiting for the first night of Hanukkah. It was such a pretty space. It made her sad to think she'd be doing much of the preparation without her daughter or her mother next year. Jane didn't know where Tara would end up for college, but she knew it would be far enough away for Jane to miss her. Change was hard. God, was it hard. Shaking off the mood that threatened to settle around her, Jane went to the front and found Tara at the counter, reading what looked to be a very old copy of Austen's Persuasion. How do you like it? I love it. Wentworth is positively swoon-worthy. He's so much better a hero than Darcy. You think so? There are people who would vehemently disagree. Pride and Prejudice is gospel. Whatevs. I read it twice. I like Lizzie, but Darcy is an idiot. He needs a wedgie or something. A wedgie? That's different. As much as her girl tried to be cool and sophisticated, every once in a while her inner 12-year-old made an appearance. But very effective at making the point, Tara defended. Jane laughed. Her daughter had a wicked sense of humor and a knack for finding the absurd in almost any situation. How is your contest entry coming? Did you get through that plot problem you were worried about? I guess I sent it. That stopped Jane in her tracks. I'm sorry, what? I sent it. It's been revised enough. If I keep editing and revising, eventually it will be flat. My words have to have passion. She waved her arm up on the last word, and Jane wondered what had triggered the response. It was fine, great, really, because getting her to submit anything before the last minute was nearly impossible. The contest she was entering had a deadline in 2 weeks. Normally, Tara would be stressing over her entry until the very end. Well, good, excellent. I'm glad you took a leap and trusted yourself. Yeah, I talked to a customer who came in and he said he was kind of a writer. He gave me some good advice. It made sense. Jane glanced over her daughter's shoulder and surveyed the rear corner of the store. There, sitting at the big round table, was Danny, scribbling in a leather-bound notebook just like old times. Kind of a writer, huh? That was definitely an understatement. He wasn't specific. I'm guessing he's a teacher or something. Or something, Jane mumbled. Danny could have been a teacher or kept with his plan of being a lawyer. He was smart enough to do anything he put his mind to, but his dreams had always been as big as that crazy imagination of his. Why don't you head home, Jane said. It's going to be quiet for the rest of the night. Go watch TV or something. I think I may just go read and go to bed. I'm tired, but I'll stay if you need me. Tara tilted her head toward the back of the shop where Danny was sitting. Her daughter was worried about her being alone with a man she didn't know, and Jane's heart warmed at the affectionate concern. For a while, Jane didn't think they would ever find common ground. When Tara turned 13, the house became a war zone. But as she got older, their relationship settled. It seemed unfair that just when they were becoming close again, her daughter would be going away. Oh, don't worry, he's an old friend, just back in town for a while. Really? He's the guy who gave me the advice. He's been here about an hour. I guess he needed a quiet space to work. He knows what he's talking about. Go with the writing. Now get out of here. Go keep grandma company. Tara hopped off the high padded stool that sat behind the counter and grabbed her large purple tote from the floor. Jane could hardly believe the young woman she'd grown into. When memories of her as a little girl were still clear as day, tall and lean, Tara floated along when she walked, half ballerina, half fairy. She had a deep blue streak in her dark brown hair and a tiny stud in her nose, but there was no edginess in the look. It worked for her. Her daughter was elegant and funky and independent. She had a tight circle of close friends, and Jane couldn't believe how lucky she was to be her mom. Tara leaned in and kissed her cheek. Night, Mom. Jane watched as her girl went out the front door and got into the small hybrid parked right in front of the shop. When she pulled away, Jane walked around, straightening up the shelves and tables in preparation for the next day. She doubted there would be many more customers at this point. It was almost 9 o'clock, and once in a while she might have wished she could be home in her bed, but there was something very peaceful about the store on a quiet night. So what I wanted to do there was set the tone for Jane with her daughter. I thought that was really important because that establishes her not only in the role as a romantic heroine, but we see her as a multifaceted person, somebody with layers. So does anybody have any questions for me before I keep going? Because like I said, I could talk endlessly. It's the teacher thing. It's like I can just keep going. So, ask a question, type it in the chat. You can unmute yourself. I don't, it doesn't bother me if somebody, talks over me. It doesn't make any difference at all. Anything? No? Okay. So the next part of Jane goes back and talks to Danny and says, you told her you were sort of a writer. The guy is an international bestseller of thrillers. So he's, quite a bit more than kind of a writer, but Tara doesn't recognize him. She doesn't know. He's just some guy. And he's given her probably the best piece of advice that any writer could get. And that is bite the bullet and send it in. Because a lot of us just will hang on to it and edit it forever. Are there, I know John writes, but is anybody else a writer?
No.
No other writers here? Okay.
I'm a writer.
Who's the writer?
Cheryl.
Cheryl, you're a writer?
I am.
What do you like to write?
Well, I have 2 published professional articles in nursing journals.
Oh, okay.
And I have a historical fiction that was published a couple years ago.
Okay. So is it historical fiction or historical romance?
Historical fiction with romance mixed in.
I love that. That's perfect. And if you look at pretty much any genre, whether it be a thriller, mystery, history, whatever it is, there's generally going to be some kind of romance thread. It's not necessarily that it's a romance novel, but that thread of a romance or a love story often is an undercurrent in a lot of books, simply because love makes the world go round. Mm-hmm. And relationships are so important. So I think we can't discount that. There was an auction recently, and it was from mostly mystery writers, but I actually offered up a consult for a mystery writer who wanted, and I said, look, you can bid on this And if you want to put any kind of love story or romance embedded in your mystery, I'll do a consult with you. And that thing sold. Like, I couldn't believe how much somebody paid for for the thing. It was great. It raised a lot of money for the organization, and I was really happy. But it was because people, if you're not quite sure how you want to layer it in, sometimes it helps to talk to somebody else who does it all the time. Now, I would do the same thing if I have to write a romantic suspense. The first thing I did was talk to a friend of mine who's a mystery writer, and in order to get, how that ebb and flow of the mystery, of how much to kind of put in for each piece of the puzzle, which was really important. So, but yeah, so I think that what I was able to do with Angel Harbor is, I think in many ways it's almost a romantic women's fiction, because Jane goes through such a paradigm shift in her life, or how her life is going to be going shortly. So she does end up having to rethink her own journey, and where she's going to go. She does have, there is a crisis that has to be dealt with, and our guy Danny does try to fix it, and she's not having it. She's not having it, where he's taking control and kind of not told her what she needs to know when he found something out. And she was not having it. And part of the reason I was able to get away with it the way I did was because when she's 50 years old, you do not take away that woman's agency. You don't take away her ability to do her work or make decisions about her own life when she's been doing it for so long. And unfortunately, I think sometimes we accept it too much. We have accepted it too much in romance, but it's changing. It's definitely changing when you have heroines who are in their 30s or above, and you're starting to even see it now, when your heroines are younger. So women's agency is the big piece. And when I say agency, it's not just about their bodies, it's about everything in their life, their ability to make their own decisions and have control over their lives, without any kind of interference. So somebody said to me that they feel as though it was always about the hot guys. And there's still I have a lot of people who will say, yep, and that hot guy on the cover will sell the book, especially if that's what somebody's looking for. But there's no more room in romance for women who are doormats. And I think that's a huge change, in how romance has evolved from those first books that changed the genre, like Bertrice and Rosemary Rogers, and Kathleen Woody-Wiss, to the Harlequins, the Presents, to early Nora Roberts. I reread her first book, which came out in 1981, I think. I didn't read it then. I read it in the 90s, when I was first really starting to read romance again. And it was called Irish Thoroughbred. And I found a copy in a box I'd put away. And I was rereading the story, and I went, oh my God, this just would not fly today. The hero going in, and he owned a horse farm, and he was fabulously rich, and she had come over to live with her uncle, who was his trainer, and she was going to be working on the farm and working with the horses and all this. And the hero would come into the barn and see her and just be overcome with her beauty, and he would kiss her without her permission, and she would just crumble under his embrace. And I'm going, yeah, that would not fly now. It would just not be okay. I don't think the modern romance reader is going to read that. I think I read it and I go, okay, well, it was a different time. But if you have somebody just coming into the genre, I don't know that they would read it in the same way. She still offered up great story, beautiful scenery and setting, wonderful character motivation, a great happily ever after, lots of deep sexual tension and emotion. but enough has changed that Nora shifted tremendously. Does it mean that that book is bad? No. But has it changed? Has the genre changed with the times? Absolutely. But the best parts of the genre have continued on. That happily ever after, that feeling that love conquers all, that understanding of, you know, of another time, place, setting, the ability to take somebody away, that hasn't changed at all. So that's really where we're at with romance. A friend of mine, Jill Shalvis, she writes contemporary romance, very prolific. She's absolutely wonderful. And she did an informal survey with her readers and said, so I'm writing my next book. It's not coming out till next year. Should I mention COVID?
Mm.
Mm.
And she got 800 responses, and 98% of them
No.
said no.
Yep.
They said, we deal with it enough now. We don't want to read it in our romance.
Mm-hmm.
And there may be a time, I mean, now that we're, things are starting to shift and vaccines are starting to be given. And so we have that hope there. I was talking to my oldest daughter, who's a physical therapist, and she used to, before she had her kids, she worked as a director of physical therapy in a nursing home. So she knows like what the colleagues are, the stress they're under. And she said, yeah, it's another year. She goes, we're looking at changes in our lifestyle. We are not going to even see normalcy for at least another year. She goes, that's really kind of what we're looking at. We just have to kind of tough it out. And that's the way these kinds of things run. I was talking to a couple of doctor friends of mine. They said the same thing. But we're starting to see hope. But does that mean that maybe I'm going to say my heroine's going to grab a mask and shove it in her purse? If this went on much longer, I might have to do something like that. Where she's going to go and grab it off and she grabbed her keys and her mask and her notebook and stuck them in her purse. That may have be something I will eventually have to do, but that may be the extent of it. Just an acknowledgement of the reality without beating anybody over the head with it. Because face it, I mean, it's something we're all dealing with right now. And how many of us forget them? Like I'm like halfway to the store and it's like I have to go back to the car because I forgot my mask. I walk out of my office, where I have an office in my library where I'm by myself, so I don't have to wear my mask if I'm alone. And I'll start to go out to the bathroom and I'm like, I turn around because I forgot my mask on my desk, but just become part of our lives and who we are. My husband deals with it all the time. I'm in his business as well. But Jill said 98%. She said, they said, nope, we don't want it. And that's because they read romance to escape from real life. They don't want real life necessarily to intrude in their romance. They don't want to see, political strife or division. They don't want to see COVID. They don't want to see these things. What they want is they can take real life. They can take somebody who's dealt with sickness. They can take war. They'll handle, they can handle heroes and heroines who come back with PTSD. They can take trauma, but they don't necessarily want it in the moment of what we're dealing right now. Current events, number one, they'll date the book. That's one thing. And the other thing is that it's something that intrudes on the escape, and we don't want that. So that's kind of where that whole idea of romance being the literature of hope, because love takes us where we need to go and gives us that hope. So that's pretty much where I'm at with this. It's been a great journey for me. I feel very privileged to be part of the romance community. It's a wonderful, giving, diverse group of people. Unlike other, there's, I don't want to say that. That's a sweeping generalization. That's not fair. You will find in romance people who are willing to help. So if you were an aspiring writer, if you were somebody who was looking to break into the genre, you will find romance authors will jump to assist you. We're one of the only groups that train our competition, as we say. We teach them, we give them advice, we will help with queries and with research and recommendations, and we do critiques and things like that. We teach classes constantly. And it's really because we know that our readers are always looking for new authors, but that doesn't mean they're going to stop reading us. A lot of romance readers will read a book a day. They're voracious. I wish I could get that through the head of a lot of bookstores, because I don't think they understand the money they're leaving on the table that they don't consider. Romance readers are extremely loyal and they read insane amounts of books. So that's one thing. So I don't worry about the fact that if I help somebody along their journey for publishing, that they're going to take away my readers. They're not. It just means that my readers are now going to have somebody else to enjoy with their books. So I'm very, very happy to do that. And that's one of the things about the romance community that's so wonderful. And there's also a really close relationship between readers and writers. I consider a lot of the readers that have been with me since I started publishing, they're friends. You know, I mean, I get cards from them and they check in with me, and a couple of them like I text with, you know, because we've met in other places and stuff like that. And it's you know, we know each other. And it's a wonderful relationship, but it's not something that's found in all genres. And I feel very, very lucky that I'm a part of this. And somebody asked me once when I was going to write a real book. So I love that one. I love that question. Because somehow, like I said, romance is considered lowbrow and not challenging and somehow lacking. And they all feel pretty real to me, especially when I'm struggling with them. My readers consider them real. And I don't know that I'm ready to give up the genre for that idea of the big book. I do have a couple of books planned that could cross over, that would definitely be women's fiction and romance. I have one that might be a rom-com. And, but that romance will always be part of it, because I do believe that love always wins. And maybe that makes me a Pollyanna. Maybe that makes me a dreamer. But I've also been married for 32 years. And the guy I'm married to, I've been dating since I was 17. So we've been together for 41 years.
Wow.
So yeah. So we had 3 kids. We're, you know, I mean, I'm very lucky, but I do believe that it happens and it's real. So that's what I want to convey to the world. I also know a lot of romance readers that are not that way, but anyway. So Cheryl, you have a question I just saw pop up. My favorite books have characters that repeat through series. Yes, I have. I love series, and I think that's a great point to bring up. A lot of romance readers love series. If you've read, I know John really likes Susan Elizabeth Phillips. Her Chicago Stars series will have, each book will focus on a different couple, but the characters recur. So you get to know Phoebe a little bit better. You get to know Dan a little bit better. You get to know Molly a little bit better as the stories go from one to the other. The same with Robin Carr's Virgin River, which became a Netflix series. They're in season 2 now, if you've seen it. They made some changes to it. I'm not such a fan, but it's, let's face it, she's got a Netflix series that is like being watched by everybody on the planet. I read 12 of the 21 Virgin River books. And by the time I got to book 12, I think I could have told you like where the moles were on some of their backs, you know, kind of thing. I knew everything. I knew what kind of food secondary characters liked more than anything. And so I see your point, like you really get to know it's like a community. And then if you bond with other readers who read those books, that's what you get. Anybody an Outlander fan?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yep.
Gail, unmute if you can. Yeah, I'm gonna. You can unmute. Where are my
Yeah, I did.
Outlander
Yeah.
fans? Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, I've read every single book of
Yeah.
Outlander.
I've read up through book 6 in Outlander, and I started reading them like back, like right in around 2000. So a few years after they came out. But I think I read the first 4 in like, oh, I don't know, like 2 weeks. It was over Christmas break. I sat my butt down in a chair the day after Christmas, and I was like, nobody speak to me because I'm exhausted and I can't even think. And I plowed through those books. My husband's looking at me and they're like 1,000 pages.
Right, right.
And all I know was I told all my friends at school about them. So everybody started reading them. So everybody's talking about Jamie Fraser. We all had to talk about Jamie Fraser. And what happened that following Halloween, I got my husband to dress up like Jamie Fraser. He rented a kilt and everything. Now my husband is 6 feet tall. He's a big guy. He's 6 feet, 210. Like he's got big shoulder. He's a big guy. So we walked into this Halloween party. I'm in a Renaissance like wench costume. You know, I've got the corset and everything, and then he comes in the kilt, and my friends were like, he wins the husband game, like he totally won. But those books are a classic example of how invested people get with characters along the way, because you become so intricately involved with everything Claire does, with Janie does, with Brianna, with Roger, with Dougal, with everybody all along. And you have this, it's a relationship with the story. And then after a while, you have the relationship with the author, because Diana Gabaldon has just become so involved in the fandom as well. So it's a crazy thing. People go to Scotland on Outlander, like, you know, tours and stuff like that. And when I was in Scotland in 2000, was it 19? Yeah, it was August of 2019. We were there, and I'd never been, but we went on a cruise, and we went to Inverness, and I had arranged to have a private tour. And so we got into the van, we met Dougie, who was awesome. And he says, all right. He says, so let me ask you, he says, are you an Outlander fan? And I went, yes. And he went, all right, so we're going to take you to some places. And he took me to the Fraser crypt. And I went down, like into the thing, and the coffin was there with Simon Fraser. It was great. And I'm like, and my daughter is dating a Fraser. So I'm taking pictures, and I'm like, I found all of his people, all of them. But this is the kind of thing that people get so wrapped up in with books. I get that with Compass Cove. My Compass Cove stories, there are only 3 books in the series. I'm writing the 4th one now. But there are people who come back and go, are you going to write this story? Are you writing this book? When are you writing this book? I need to see this character's story. When are you going to write? And I'm like, sometime, like I would love to be able to write all the time, but I still do have a full-time job for at least a couple more years until I retire. So, but it's great. But this is the thing that people need. You know, this is, especially now, you know, like we can become immersed in these wonderful books that just make us feel everything. And why wouldn't we want that? And I was a children's librarian. I was an elementary librarian for a while, and I see Tara over there in the corner. Hi, Tara. um, and Tara and I work together. She's a librarian as well. And, but the children's books, this is where they start, by getting them involved and getting them to understand and feel what the characters go through, which is why Harry Potter hit the way it did. Everybody's like, these books, how are they getting these third graders to read these books that are like this? And it's because they become invested in the characters. I remember when one of the Harry Potters, I think it was book 4 or 5 came out, my son, who was like 10 years old at the time, and I sat on the front porch waiting for the mailman and for that book to come in the mail. And we actually flipped for it to see who was going to read it first. So it was just a great experience for kids to have, but adults still have that. We still feel it. So I love that. So I see a question. Let me see. Thinking about the editing process when you're devastated when your editors make comments in the beginning. How do you feel about the process now? I still cry when I get edits. I've told this to classes, when I teach writing classes. I get my edits back, and what happens is my editor will go through and they mark it up in what's called track changes in Word. And I'll open it up. I'll see all the red and blue and green marks, and I close it. And I go, okay. And then I'll open it the second time, like a day or two later, and then I curse at the red and the blue and the green marks. And then I close it. And then I open it up the third time and I cry because I'm a horrible writer and I don't know anything. And then I close it. And then by the fourth time, I'm ready to start working. So it takes me about 5-6 days to kind of process through the edits. But the thing is, I like the process. I do like the process. I enjoy working with my editor. I have a wonderful editor named Kelly Hunter, and she's also an author. And she just gets me. And she knows where to push, and she knows how to get that deep emotion out of me. And I'm not afraid of it. Yeah, does it hurt sometimes if I look at something? But I also have to come to the understanding that not everything that I've written is perfect. It's not. The best writers need editing. Stephen King gets edited. Nora Roberts gets edited. Everybody gets edited. And if anybody tells you that they don't, my guess is they've written their book is not going to be as good as they want it to be. Every author needs editing. I thought when I turned in Angel Harbor, it was one of the best books I'd ever written. I think it had the bones of the best book, but it took 2 rounds of edits to get it to where it is today, where people are reading it and going, I want to go there. I go, but you can, you can. I can tell you where it is. So it was really exciting. But yeah, it's and it's as far as how do I get my ideas? I have tons of ideas. I have so many ideas. I can't keep up. I have a notebook where I keep ideas and I kind of flesh them out a little bit. I'll write a page and hopefully I'll get to them. So I have a lot of ideas. And I also have a program I work in called One Stop for Writers. And it allows me to flesh out plots and characters. So what I'll do is if I get an idea, I don't want to work on my manuscript, I'll play in that and I'll put down ideas for new stories, and then I can go back to it and pick it up when I need to. Any other questions for me?
I have a question.
Sure.
Is when you're talking about all the editing that you get from your editor, is there a danger that something you've created is lost?
Yes.
With what they're doing to your book, if
Yes.
I can use that term?
Yes. And that's a valid question. And one of the things that I think is really important is that an author, and it's harder when you're new and when like it's your first book or your second book. and you're in that process with an editor, most editors will say, this is my suggestion, but nothing is ever written in stone. So even when I was a first-time author, when I had an editor come at me and say, I really think you need to do this, this, and this, and I'll say, all right, I agree with this, but not this. And generally you can go back and talk to them about it. Kelly came to me with something in Angel Harbor, and I went to try it, and I went back and I said, yeah, this isn't going to work. I was like, it just doesn't ring true. It's not the kind of thing that is going to work for Jane. And I don't think I think it's going to corrupt the end of the story. So she went, okay, yeah, ultimately it's your book. And you really can. It's very rare that an editor is going to dig their heels in on something that absolutely has to be changed. But, you know, it has happened. But I think, too, there's the rule of three that I always say. And I generally, it's my editor will read, but I'll always send a book out to a couple of beta readers to read. And I'll say, you know, give me some feedback. Tell me what you think. I always say, what did you like? What confused you? And what do you want to know more about? Those are my three questions. Because if I get feedback on that, then I have a good understanding. And if I see one person say something, I'll say, okay, if I see two people say the same thing, I'll be like, oh, there might be something here. If the third person comes in, it's got to be fixed. Because if three people came down and went, this is a problem, that means that readers are going to see that everywhere. So you have to be ready for that. What? Oh, Tara's putting her 6-year-old to bed. But so what, anybody else? Because we're just about wrapped up. I know that Madeline has something too. So we want to finish up because there are a few books to give away. So.
Sure, absolutely. That sounds great. Yeah, we do have some raffle winners. I just wanted to give a little plug about the library because I know you were mentioning about reading books. By the way, I read, I think, almost all of the Outlander series in the summer of 2014 because I was dealing with a personal situation and it was kind of angst-ridden, filled with anxiety. Not as bad as COVID, but yeah, something about that.
Yeah.
July and August, I ripped through that series. Don't think I got to the last book because it wasn't out yet, but wow. It was fantastic.
It's great. It's great.
Was.
You were able to just go away, just
Yes.
get away from it.
Calgon, take me away. So as far as reading books, just a quick plug for the library. We're open. Come by, browse, place a request by phone, in person, or from home. We can arrange for curbside pickup, or you can pick it up in the library. There's also Overdrive or Libby, which is offered through the library to be able to read books online, ebooks. There are also e-audiobooks that you can listen to. And if you'd like more information, please call the library and speak with someone in the Adult Services Department, or go to our website where you'll find some more information. Okay.
Libby is fabulous. Put it on your tablet and you're like in with your library card. It's great. We're getting Sora for the school and it's amazing. So
love Overdrive. Use it every day. Yep. Thank you, Cheryl. Okay. So I have a little spinner here that I'm going to spin the wheel. And let me just give me a second just to move some things here. And there we go. So we'll see who the winners are. And the first book goes to Gail. Gail, you are a winner. Do you hear me, Gail? Yay. Okay. So one of the things that I do have to mention, I have to ask, and this was a requirement by our programmer, is that we receive verbal confirmation that they won the book. So how you can do that is one of two ways. You can either type your first name in the chat and, you know, I won the book, yay. Or if you want, you can verbally say your name. You don't have to give us your last name, your first name, and that you won the book. Okay, so I think the first one was that? Who was that again?
I think Gail left.
That was Gail. Okay, let's spin it again. And the second winner is Tara.
Tara, you want a book? She's putting her 6-year-old to bed, she said. So she is here though.
Okay. Tara, if you can type it in the chat, that would be great. Okay, and the next one would be, let's close that. And spin it again. And that is Camilla. Camilla, are you still there?
Here.
Perfect. Can you
I'm
just,
here. Okay. That's great.
okay,
Thank you.
so Camilla, you won the book.
Thank
Okay.
you.
And the last spin. And that is Cheryl. Cheryl, are you still with us?
Yay, I'm so happy I won the book.
Yay. Okay, so what we're going to do is write your names on the book and ask you to stop by the circulation department to pick it up, okay?
Yeah, and Tara just said she is super excited. She
Oh,
wrote
I
in the
see.
chat.
Okay.
Yeah.
I see it in the chat. That's great. Wonderful. Congratulations, Tara. Okay, awesome.
All right. Yeah, and I
That's
got
great.
to the library and I signed them all. So
Oh, that's
Oh,
great.
yes,
Thank
they're
you very much.
personally
Thank you.
yeah, I
inscribed.
went last week. That was nice. So, all right. Well, it was great, everybody. Thank you for coming. If you ever have any questions or you want to reach out, you can contact me through my website, which is jeanniemoon.com. I'm just going to type it in the chat really quick. And I'm on Facebook and Instagram, and you can pop on there, friend me, whatever, like my page. But I have a contact page through on jeanniemoon.com, and I love hearing from people. So hopefully I'll hear from you again. All right, take care. Bye.
Thanks, Jeannie.
All right. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye now.